Welcome back. So here's the last of our tutorial series for this week, specifically focusing on the stylistic devices that you have to analyse so that you can talk about how an author makes meaning. And that's obviously central to our study of texts in English and literature. So that the three in this series were characterisation, so the ways in which characters represent values, attitudes and beliefs. The interplay of themes, so that's the importance of big ideas and how the way a character actually demonstrates that theme teaches the audience a lesson. And the last one is the use of symbols and motifs. Okay, so there's terminology associated with symbols and motifs, just as there was the other stylistic devices. So I'm going to start off by sharing the PowerPoint slide that looks at the language of symbols and motifs and considers what some of those are and how it is you might identify them. All right, so let's have a look. So here we have our language of symbolic analysis. All right, the language of symbolism. So symbolism is present all the way everywhere in the world. Okay, so it's not something that's unique to literature, not even a little bit. We as students in a Catholic school, we're aware of the symbols associated with our religion and our faith. We are aware of the symbols associated with the practice of our sports. Great traditions here at Downlands like Tradition and Spirit Day or Chevalier Mass, where we put hearts on our cheeks. So we're aware that symbols and the power that they have attached to them are actually present throughout the world. Okay, and certainly Macbeth, as a text that reflects human life, it's no different. Okay, so it's a literary device that uses things, but those things could be words, people, props, to represent ideas that are bigger and more important than the literal meaning of a thing. Okay, so if we were to consider the cross in the Catholic Church, the importance of the cross, literally it is a geometric arrangement made of wood, or maybe made of metal, or maybe made of plastic, maybe decorated with the caricature of Jesus, but the symbolic meaning attached to that is so much more, okay? When we look at it, we understand that crucial event as part of our faith. We recognise what it is, what human failings led to that happening. We see it everywhere around the world. So when we see a cross anywhere, a crucifix, anywhere in the world, we are connected to people of a similar faith, even if we don't speak the same language and we never meet them again. Okay, so symbols have enormous power beyond the literal construction of the item. Okay, so there are probably 4 key symbols in Macbeth, and I would say, and you would, as soon as you can see them on the list, you'd be aware that you've already encountered these symbols. Okay, so if the words, in the case of a text, have more meaning than their literal meaning, then we must be able to deconstruct the use of words like blood and be able to identify its significance and its symbolic meaning. So blood is listed as the first of the symbols because it's probably the most prominent. And it's literally the most prominent of the symbols because the word blood appears so often. What else makes it significant is that blood is not used in the same way every time that it's referenced. So sometimes blood is about the liquid within our body that gives us life. Okay, so it is quite literally the life-giving substance within our bodies, and if it leaks out because we've stabbed the king, then we're not going to survive. Sometimes blood is used to refer to bond, okay, the relationship between family members and the idea that that bond is stronger than the bonds of friendship or of duty, okay? So to evoke the relationship of blood, we're suggesting that's one of the strongest connections to another person that we can have, okay? Blood is often also used in oaths. So if someone, if you can remember the idea of blood brothers or blood bonds, then the idea that you would use your blood to swear allegiance to somebody is essentially kind of symbolically representing that you would spill all of your blood in order to defend them. Okay, so if you actually use your blood to swear loyalty and then you turn on somebody, you either are very, very strong or very, very stupid, because you are breaking one of the strongest bonds that could have existed. I'm aware, just in the work that I've done with my class, how frequently in Act 2 and Act 3 specifically, the language of light and dark is used. And it becomes so obvious that there are actually characters whose actions you can associate with night and characters whose actions appear in the daytime. And this is a technique used in filmmaking and in storytelling the world over. So often bad things happen at night. You know, the veil of darkness blurs the lines between good and evil. And it often takes daylight to come again for us to be able to think clearly. So it's not by accident that Banquo rides off at twilight. He is a noble character who tells us that he's pretty sure that Macbeth is responsible for the death of the king in daylight, but late afternoon. He's going for a ride. He'll be back after dark. So under the cover of darkness, he is murdered. Okay, so a lot of Macbeth's actions, either the actions that he takes or the ones he directs others to take, are under the cover of darkness. Now, interesting. In the cold light of day, we begin to see the change in Lady Macbeth's actions or reactions. So the symbolic use of light and dark is allowing us actually to see the way in which a character is reacting to the actions of other characters. So that's the power of individual words. Visions and hallucinations appear all the way through. And again, the interplay between symbols and themes would allow you to explore something like visions and hallucinations in a range of different ways. Are hallucinations the sign of a madman? Are hallucinations the sign of the supernatural? Are they indeed visions, not hallucinations? So vision has different connotations, doesn't it? So is this a sign from God, or does Macbeth believe it's a sign from God? Is the fact that the witches appear to disappear at the end of Act 1, Scene 3, the idea that they were never there, that they are no more substantial than the dagger that Macbeth sees in front of him in Act 2, no more significant than the spot that Lady Macbeth cannot rub out by the end of her life. Right, so there are ways that you could use symbols like sleep and like visions and hallucinations in lots of ways, depending on which theme you connect it to. And the last one is sleep. And the concept of sleep is developed across a whole lot of different Shakespearean tragedies specifically, which is really interesting. There's probably a whole area of research there about what it was that Shakespeare actually felt sleep was about. Hamlet, of course, discusses the idea of sleeping without dreaming because he's a little fascinated with death as something that is finite and which doesn't have a whole lot of different outcomes that he has to worry about. So he finds death a little bit comforting because he doesn't have to overthink it. Juliet fakes death in the guise of sleep, and she actually takes the poison as she goes to bed. So we get that multifaceted idea of sleep as mirroring death, but not actually being death. Okay, so sleep is present here. The idea that Macbeth hath murdered sleep. So he's murdered the idea of rest. He's murdered the idea of peace. And he's actually made it death. And then he challenges that when he said, oh, well, actually, I kind of did Duncan a favour. He doesn't have to worry about all the trappings of power anymore. Okay, so symbols are individual words, characters. So characters can be symbols, plot devices or props that have greater meaning than their literal shape or their literal definition. A motif isn't necessarily as complex, as continuous, or as powerful as a symbol. But motifs are also present throughout Macbeth, and there are quite a few of them to consider. So if we were to come out of that for a second, let's consider some of the ways that we might look at motifs. So from the start of Act 1, we have at least 3 different motifs presented to us in Act 1, Scene 1. First of all, the stage direction tells us that a storm is brewing. So the motif of weather appears all the way through the text. And it's a really great stage technique because we are familiar with the feeling we get when there's a storm on the horizon. And the fact that we get that feeling means that when we see it portrayed on the screen or on the stage, we understand what it is we're supposed to feel. Okay, so we see the gloomy weather, the storm threatening, and the fact that the storm is not just a light, gentle rain or a good soaking rain, but something destructive suggests that what's about to follow is directly related. So weather is one. We meet our witches. Now, the witches are characters, but their presence is actually sort of sporadic. They only come at certain times, and they come often enough to be noteworthy, but not often enough to necessarily be symbolic of say, supernatural power. Okay, so somewhere in the middle is that they are an annoyance. They're something that we need to put a thumbtack in and make note of, and work out why it is that they appear when they appear and what the significance of that is. Well, of course, the other thing that happens when the witches appear is the prophecies. So the prophecies or predictions are also a motif. Okay, so a motif of prophecy or prediction lets us explore that theme of agency. So if I'm given a prediction that I'm going to become king, do I have to take action to make it happen? Or can I just sit back and it'll happen by itself? Whether I decide to act or not is ultimately a reflection of whether I believe I'm in charge of my own actions or whether God or some other power is going to decide my life for me. And certainly the importance of God's guidance was central in Jacobean England. Okay, so we're quite okay with the idea that God has a plan for us in Jacobean England, and that choosing to act instead is actually one of the problems. Now, the final motif that I'd like to draw your attention to is actually also something that relates to a theme, and that's really useful because it means that we can discuss the theme with the ways in which the words associated with this motif, or the words of this motif, are actually presented. And the motif is gender. Okay, so if we remember that lit charts highlighted manliness or masculinity as a theme, and I put it on my terminology list as gender, so that lets you put all of it together. There are a range of different references to what it means to be a man, what it means to be masculine, what it means to be a woman, so a real woman, a woman that we would recognize as female, and what it would mean to be a mother. Now, each of those relates to gender, and the motif of words associated with gender runs all the way through, but it isn't necessarily about the physical attributes of the character. It's actually more about how they see themselves in the world and in their relationship with someone like God. So in Act 3, when we meet our murderers, we actually have Macbeth likening them to dogs. So he acknowledges that they're actually men, but by likening them to dogs, he's actually stripping them of the powers of men. So he's saying that you are not reasonable, you are not moral, you are not able to think for yourself, you are little more than animals. Okay, and in the great chain of being, that is a pretty significant insult to level at someone. When we are praising Lady Macbeth for her coldness, Macbeth uses the line, "Bring forth men, children only," and that is that idea that she is made of such sturdy stuff that it would not even be possible that a gentle girl child could be born by her, that instead, because she is so strong, that only strong masculine children could come forth. So what that obviously highlights is that then there are certain traits associated with masculinity and certain traits associated with femininity. The ways in which even things like certain types of death occur have relations to gender. So Macbeth generally chooses to end lives with weapons, and weapons were generally associated with masculinity. Poison was often considered a woman's device, okay? So when, for example, Juliet is given the potion that puts her into a fake sleep, she's given that by Friar Lawrence. Well, he's not quite masculine. He's not the father of a line. He sits outside society, and so there's a little bit of a judgment being made there about the appropriateness of him being able to access poison. But even Romeo buys a poison to end his own life when he hears about Juliet's death. Okay, so again, we're getting this idea that a man, a real man, would have taken a different action. And then ultimately, it is Juliet who stabs herself. So that we see the interplay of the motifs of gender in a whole lot of things that actually have nothing to do with men and women. And that's important to note. So our motifs: weather, witches, prophecies, and gender. And between those and our symbols, we have a whole range of stylistic devices that we can analyse to highlight how Shakespeare has made meaning. All right, so after this series, then we begin to focus on the specifics of our play, the deconstruction of individual characters, and by the end of week 5, we are preparing for the writing of essays and the deconstruction of essay questions. As is always the case, if you have any suggestions about tutorials that you would like me to create, please add them to the comments or email me directly, and I'm more than happy to oblige. Until then, see you later.